Unscannable 33.
Actually took taxpayer dollars and took human genes, growth genes, and put them into this pig. As you can see, there's a problem. Instead of like the mouse that with human genes that grew so big, the genes work differently. The human growth genes work differently in this pig. It was cross-eyed, bow-legged, impotent. The musculature had overwhelmed it. And I could only photograph it against a plywood board here because it's the only way it could stand up. And you can imagine the suffering and how terrible this was for this particular animal. And this was another experiment, is what would happen. They were interested in taking the skin of a cow and seeing if they could genetically have a pig produce that skin. Apparently it'd be more beneficial for slaughtering. And so this is literally a pig that has a cow's skin. The researchers were very proud of that. The most important thing to understand about genetic engineering is that it is really an attempt to say, listen, no matter how unsustainable our technologies, we're not going to change the technology to fit the natural and living systems. We're going to change living systems so they fit the technology. We all know how horrible factory farming is, and one of the problems they have with egg-laying chickens, with hens, is they have a mothering instinct. They want to brood. And here you see one of the brain experiments, genetically engineering chickens to take out the mothering instinct from these brooding chickens, so they won't brood anymore. They won't have the mothering instinct anymore, so they'll fit the factory farm system. This is one of the chimera birds they're working with to take away the mothering instinct. So we don't change our factory farm system. We actually take the mothering instinct out of animals so that they will fit the technology.
Conspiracies, I maintain, are carried out regularly by the national security state. What's the national security state? It's the White House Executive Office, it's elements within the State Department and the Pentagon, it's the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, it's the National Security Council, the National Security Agency, and the CIA and other intelligence agencies. That conglomeration or operational linked groups in that conglomeration are what is known as the national security state. The Treasury at times, it can enlist commerce, it could bring in, I feel there are people in Congress who are linked to it. I think Sam Nunn's got one foot. I mean, you know, there's some people like that. The national security state is involved in secretly planned operations around the globe. It resorts to low-intensity warfare, special forces, undercover agents, surveillance and infiltration and destruction of dissident groups, the bribing of state leaders, unlawful break-ins, the training of death squads and torturers, political assassination, counterinsurgency suppression, and terrorist military forces against revolutionary governments, as in Angola, Mozambique, and Nicaragua. Our rulers themselves explicitly call for conspiratorial activities. They publicly admit it, except they don't call them conspiracies. They call them covert action, clandestine operations, special operations, and national security. Now, if for some reason you don't want to call these undertakings conspiracies, don't call them conspiracies. Give them another name. Call them peekaboo operations, surprise, surprise initiatives. Call them whatever you want, but recognize them for what they are, as willfully planned actions whose real intentions are almost always denied. If they're not conspiring, why all the secrecy? Well, who is this corporate class, this super rich plutocracy, this oligarchy that you keep talking about, Parenti? Who is these guys? Well, there's no mystery. I'm talking about the top 400 families. They're listed in Forbes, the Social Register, almost a third of the descendants of whom are linked by blood or marriage to the Rockefeller, DuPont, Mellon, and Morgan dynasties. I'm talking about the super rich 1%, less than 1% of the population of this country that owns 70% of the nation's wealth. The economist Paul Samuelson, 30 years ago, gave a very vivid image. It still holds. He says, if you want to look at the income distribution in this country, if you wanted to build an income pyramid, imagine taking children's blocks, and each block is $1,000. And you pile them up, the highest income in this country would be vastly higher than the Eiffel Tower, while almost all of us would be not more than a yard or a yard and a half off the ground. This gives you an idea of the spread and the distribution. Instead of conspiracy theory, what the apologists for power give us is what I call innocence theory. Now, innocence theory has several varieties. There's somnambulist theory, that those in power just do things walking in their sleep without a thought for their vast holdings and interests. David Rockefeller wakes up in the morning and he says, what am I going to do today? Am I going to look after my immense fortunes and investments? No. If I did that, I would only be playing into the hands of the conspiracy theorists. I won't do that. He says, I don't like unions, David Rockefeller says. And he said, oh, Morgan's Melons, you don't like unions either. What? Isn't that coincidence? I don't like unions, I guess, because they sound like onions. I don't like onions. Yeah, that's what it... Along with somnambulist theory, we might explain away their hegemony as coincidence theory, that by sheer chance things just happen repeatedly and coincidentally to benefit their interest without any conscious connivance by them, and it is most uncanny. A frequent mode of explanation is stupidity theory. You hear it among people all the time. They just don't know what they're doing. Those who hold to innocence theory would have us believe that unjust social arrangements, wrongful policies, are momentary aberrations. So there's momentary aberration theory. There's incompetence theory. There's unintended consequences theory. There's innocent cultural proclivities theory. And by the way, to be sure, such things exist. I mean, there are unintended consequences, there are cultural influences, all that. But do they explain the reasons for the major policy decisions of our leaders? Evidence and common sense suggest that the rich and powerful are not oblivious to their interests and do not leave things to chance.
Unscannable 33.